Hey there, and welcome. So let's talk about love. We all hope it's going to be our greatest source of joy, right? But so often it ends up being, well, a pretty reliable source of misery. And that's the paradox we're diving into today. We're going to try and diagnose what's going wrong by looking at a little philosophy and culture and then explore a way forward. But to really understand what's at stake, let's start with a hard number. So get this. In Britain, an estimated 42% of marriages end in divorce. And that's just the marriages. This number really points to a bigger fragility in our relationships today, and it leaves so many of us asking the same really fundamental question. You know, why this huge disconnect? It's a question that really gets to the core of what it means to be human. We chase that incredible high of connection, but then we so often find ourselves in the depths of disappointment. This is the big puzzle we're going to try and unpack today. Okay, so here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with the modern love paradox. Then we'll get into two key diagnoses, what I'm calling the romanticism hangover and our modern culture of disposable love. After that, we're going to pivot to the solution, this idea that love isn't a feeling you find, but a skill you actually learn. And we'll wrap up by breaking down 4 essential elements for a much healthier approach to it all. All right, let's start with this paradox. It's that massive gap between our sky-high hopes for what love should be and the often messy, complicated reality we actually live in. And a huge part of the problem is that we've been taught to completely misunderstand what love is at its core. Now, here's a pretty radical thought from the philosopher Alain de Botton. We tend to treat love like it's this magical feeling we just fall into, right? An enthusiasm that should just carry us along without any effort. But what if that whole idea is just wrong? What if love is less like magic and more like learning to play the piano or speak a new language? A skill that takes real practice, patience, and a whole lot of dedication. And that leads us right into our first big diagnosis. You see, this idea of love as some spontaneous feeling has really deep roots. In fact, you could say we're all living with a kind of cultural hangover from an intellectual movement that started over 200 years ago. And that movement is Romanticism. I mean, it gave us beautiful art and poetry, no doubt, but it also sold us a very specific and often pretty damaging set of ideas about love. It taught us that we should follow our feelings above all else, and that our instincts would magically lead us to our perfect match. And you can see those core beliefs right here. This idea of a soulmate, I mean, that puts an impossible amount of pressure on one person to be absolutely everything for us. The idea that real love should be effortless, that makes us think something's broken the minute we actually have to work at it. And the fantasy of a wordless connection, well, that usually just leads to a lot of sulking when our partners, surprise, surprise, can't read our minds. So on top of this historical hangover, we've got a very modern problem. We're living in a culture that treats just about everything, including our relationships, like they're disposable consumer goods. The sociologist Zygmunt Bauman had a great term for this: liquid love. Think about it. In the past, relationships were more, well, solid. They were built to last, and if they broke, you tried to repair them. But today, relationships are more and more liquid. They're easy to get into and just as easy to leave. The slightest little problem and we start thinking about getting an upgrade, just like we would with our phone. And here's the crucial point from the philosopher Byung-Chul Han. He says that this consumer mindset makes the other person disappear. We stop seeing them as a real, complex, flawed person. Instead, they just become a collection of features we swipe on, a profile we evaluate. The actual human being gets completely lost in the process. The French philosopher Gilles Lipovetsky calls our time a civilization of lightness. And it makes sense, right? We want everything to be easy, efficient, without any heavy burdens. But that desire for lightness makes deep, sometimes difficult commitments feel oppressive. And the result is that our relationships risk becoming just as fleeting and superficial as everything else. Okay, so we've got our diagnosis: a romantic hangover mixed with a consumerist culture. It sounds kind of bleak, I know, but here's the hopeful part. If those are the problems, then the solution is to unlearn all those bad habits and start to see love as what it really is: a skill. And this chart really lays out the shift in thinking. The romantic view is passive. You just find the right person and it all magically works. But the skill-based view is active. Love is something you build with another person. And this leads to such a crucial insight. Compatibility isn't something you find, it's an achievement of love itself. So how do we actually practice this skill?
Alain de Botton suggests what he calls romantic realism. First, just accept that both you and your partner are deeply, deeply flawed. No one is perfect. Aim for a good enough relationship. Second, embrace the boring stuff, the administration, doing the laundry, managing a budget. That isn't a failure of romance. It is the romance. And third, and this might be the biggest shift of all, is to mature from that childish desire to be loved to the very adult practice of loving someone else.
Now, to build on this idea of mature love, let's look at a really beautiful framework from the Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. He laid out 4 key elements that have to be there for love to be what he calls true love. And these aren't just feelings. They're things we can actually cultivate. The first one is maitri, or loving kindness. This is basically the ability to offer happiness. It's a pretty simple test, really. Does your love create joy? And it all starts with being able to create joy within yourself, so you actually have something real to offer the person you love. Next up is karuna, or compassion. And this isn't just feeling sorry for someone. This is the skill of helping each other suffer less. It means you have to deeply understand your partner's pain and have the wisdom and energy to help them transform it. It's a really active, powerful practice. The third element is mudita, or put simply, joy. Thich Nhat Hanh says it perfectly. If loving makes you or the other person cry all the time, it's not true love. It's that simple. While romanticism might glorify all that drama and tragedy, this view says that real, authentic joy is an absolute must. And finally, we have upeksha, which is often translated as inclusiveness. This is the really profound realization that there's no real separation between you and your partner. Their problems are your problems. Their happiness is your happiness. It's the ultimate antidote to the me-first attitude of consumer love. You know, in the end, this all comes down to a choice. We can keep blaming our partners, or dating apps, or love itself for our disappointments, or we can choose to see love in a completely different way. So, I'll just leave you with this final thought. If love really is a skill, are we willing to put in the work and become its students? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. If you want to dive deeper into any of these ideas, the sources we drew from are right there on your screen.
Getting to the heart of the matter isn't always easy, but here we always look for the essence. Thank you for your time and your curiosity. Subscribe for more answers, and as always, thanks for watching.